Hello, and welcome to episode 98 of Things I've Learned from Barry Harris. And actually, we could call this Things I've Learned from Barry Harris and Things I've Learned from Thomas Echols, because the ideas that I'm talking about I learned specifically from his way. Thomas Echols, who is the brilliant guitar player who has his own YouTube page called Labyrinth of Limitations. I highly recommend it. I'll leave a link in the description for it. He had this beautiful way of looking at the six diminished, and Barry's actually four scales of chords, and breaking them apart into what he called floors, and he goes through this really, in a beautiful way on his YouTube page. But I just want to show you some things that I got from it. The first thing is, let's take, for example, C minor 6. Now there's our C minor 6. Now the first thing that we as guitar players always go to is a drop 2. And for those of you that don't know, a drop 2, the way I like to look at it, is just 4 consecutive strings. That's a drop 2. And that's the first thing that we usually do. And it's 4 consecutive strings of 4 different notes. But we got to learn a bunch of other things before we learn that. For instance, we have to learn just the scale. And for those of you that don't know, the C minor 6 diminished scale is 4 notes of a C minor 6, C, E flat, G, and A, and 4 notes of a D diminished, D, F, A flat, and B. And you put them together. And then you have a D minor 6 diminished scale. So here's your C minor 6, C, E flat, G, A, and here's your D diminished, D, F, A flat, B. And when you put those notes together, you have this beautiful 8-note scale that goes back and forth between a C minor 6, and a D diminished. Really wonderful. Anyway, so here's the scale up and down in single notes. Now you also have to know that scale in what Thomas refers to as the second floor, which would be thirds. So I'm still going to take the same thing, except now I'm going to do thirds with it. And starting with the C is going to be the highest note of the third. So we'll do the first one. So that's thirds. That's the second thing we have to know. The third thing we should know are triads. So triads, and again, I'm going to keep the C starting as the highest note. So the first triad is kind of tough, but then after that it gets a little easier. There's C minor 6 in triads. So that's in triads. So let's just take those 3, which would be single notes, then what he would call the second floor, which would be thirds, then what he would call the third floor, which would be triads. So let's just take those 3 and let's see how to use them. So we're using C minor 6. And I thought something to show as an example. There's a part of all the things you are in the second A that starts on C minor. Here comes where it says, okay, so this little thing, this is C minor 6, and the last note I make D7. So if we just did this, now we're going to have to learn how to do those just single notes. So we'll say, that's beautiful. But now what if we wanted to make those thirds? So if we said, that was in thirds. Now maybe we'll do triads. So those are the three. So now we did in single notes, Or we did it in thirds, or we did it in triads, which is a little bit harder, which is all pretty. All those three are beautiful. But now the brilliance of this is a lot of times Barry, when he talks about contrary motion, he talks about, which just basically means one note moving in one direction and the same note then moving in a different direction. So you get them splitting this way. So if I were to play C, D, E flat, I would also want to play C and then move it down to B and then to A. So that would be our scale. So it would be, which is pretty. That's nice if I did contrary motion. So let's try that. That's really nice. But the brilliance of knowing your floors is saying, well, if I know the first floor, if I go contrary motion, the first floor is single notes. The second floor is thirds. So now I know I'm going to do thirds. The next floor is going to be triad. So I know the next note is going to be a triad. So now I have this, which is really brilliant and super helpful. So now I have this little spot on all the things you are, which is a little, what some people might consider like this little nothing spot. But look at how rich and beautiful you can make it. There's single notes. Then here's thirds. Now here's triads. Now that's just 3 floors. Then there's 9 floors altogether, but we'll just focus on the 3. Then you start to do some contrary motion stuff. And now you have a limitless amount of ways that you can play that same little spot, that same little thing. So it's just super important for us as guitar players. This is what I've learned within the last year or so. Us as guitar players, we can't just be drop 2 people all the time. We can't just make that our default. We have to see the movement within Barry's 4 scales of chords. We can't just be doing drop 2s and drop 3s. Well, drop 3s are just playing, if we start from the lowest note, it's playing a note, skip a string, playing 3 notes. Those are drop 3s. Those are important, and those come later in the floors, but we're just focused on those 3, or just those 3 floors. And you have to say to yourself, okay, if I work on one or more of Barry's scales of chords, in this particular episode, we're talking about just C minor 6. So say, okay, a good question for yourself is, do I know the first 3 floors? Can I just start on any note? Can I start on any note? Can I start on any note and play the scale up and down? Any note. So that's just any note. Likewise, can I start on any note and go up thirds? Any place. Any place. Can I go up thirds? Any place. Can I go up triads? Can I just see them? See, can I see triads? So you have to see all that. Now, granted, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of practice. It's a lot of memorizing of certain grips. But what it allows you to do is really see the scale, and even more importantly, see all the little movement that Barry is constantly talking about when he's talking about he doesn't play chords, he plays movement. This is what he's talking about. And I think what Coleman Hawkins was talking about as well, in a slightly different meaning. But this is the brilliance of, like I said, I hadn't thought of this myself. I had done a couple of things with just, contrary motion, but then I could never really get it right. I was always thinking to myself, like, I had all these drop 2 things, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, I'm going to do this contrary motion thing with just 2 notes. and it would sound really, well, for me at least, it sounded really contrived. It didn't sound like it was a part of what I was playing. It's like, here's this little trick I knew how to do, and I kind of jammed it into this spot. So this, though, with the idea of the floors, I see how the brilliance of it right away and what I have to work on. And also, it makes you aware of things that you don't know. Like if you can't do C minor 6 diminished in triads, you can't kid yourself with that. It's either you know how to do it or you don't know how to do it. And you start playing triads and you realize where you're lost, on which string set you get lost. Some of them are a little harder to do than others, but they're really wonderful. So that's just 3 floors. See, there's 9 floors. We already know a bunch of floors because we know, a lot of us know drop 2s and drop 3s, and actually the drop 2, drop 4 is another floor. We know, a lot of us know that, but some of us don't. But that's a great way to get to learn the scale. Say, okay, I'm just going to practice my scale in just thirds. Do I know my scale in thirds? Do I know it in thirds thoroughly enough? Am I able to do that? Am I able to do it in triads thoroughly enough? Am I able to do just single notes? Because even if we said, if we got to this point, I mean, that's the scale. Do I know how to do that? That's just thirds. So it's really something special. I highly recommend checking it out because it has made a huge difference for me, and I think it would help you immensely too if you check out his channel and just follow along in these little tiny steps. I really took baby steps with it, and that's what I suggest. Take baby steps. So start off with single notes, then maybe thirds, then maybe triads, and see how far you can go with it. And that's for all his scales of chords. His minor 6 diminished, his major 6 diminished, his dominant 7 diminished, and his dominant 7/5/5 diminished, which are all 4 of his scales of chords. So, okay, well, hope you enjoyed this episode of things I've learned from Barry Harris and Thomas Echols. And until next time, enjoy practicing your floors, at least the first 3.